I have been attending the Alderton Hall competition for 11 years, first as a teacher, escorting students from St. Bridget's Primary to watch the older children play. Then, after I retired, as a mother, because my daughter Clara had grown into a serious young pianist, and the Alderton regional rounds were where serious young pianists went to be tested. I say this to explain that I know the hall. I know which chairs in the third row have a clear sight line to the piano and which are blocked by the pillar on the left. I know the smell of it, old wood and string wax, and something faintly electrical from the lighting rig. I know the particular hush that settles over a competition audience between rounds, that restless, half-attentive murmur that fills the hall like water filling a bowl. And I know the quality of silence that falls when a young player sits down and plays something genuinely fine. I thought I had heard everything Alderton Hall had to offer. I was wrong by a very great distance. Daniel Marsh had worked at the hall for as long as I had been attending it. Perhaps longer. He was one of those men who become so thoroughly part of a place that you stop noticing them the way you stop noticing the walls. Slender, somewhere in his mid-40s. Hair the color of iron filings going gray at the temples. He wore the same brown work coat every time I saw him, a canvas thing with two patch pockets. And he moved through the hall with the unhurried economy of someone who had learned long ago exactly how much effort each task required and not a fraction more. His job, as I understood it, was to assist the piano technician. He carried things. He adjusted the bench between competitors according to the slip each child handed him. Height, angle, distance from the keys. He polished the lid of the Bechstein Grand during the longer intervals, drawing the cloth in long, careful strokes that left no smear. Once I had watched him spend 4 minutes on a single hinge, testing it, oiling it, testing it again. The attention of a man who cared about the thing, not merely the task. I had never heard him speak much. A few words to the children as he set the bench. Is that right for you? Sometimes a nod to the hall manager. He was not unfriendly. He was simply contained. That Saturday, Clara was playing in the third round. She had performed Schumann in the morning, well, I thought, though the judges had given her a middling score, and was due back on stage after the interval. I was in my usual seat in the third row, slightly left of center. The interval had run long. There had been some question about the program order, and the hall was in that particular state of suspended animation that competition intervals produce. Parents checking their phones, judges conferring behind the table to the left of the stage, children running their fingers silently over their knees in the shapes of their pieces. Sir Edmund Voss had been circulating since the morning session ended. If you have attended the Alderton competition more than twice, you know Sir Edmund. He was the hall's chief patron, a man who had made a considerable fortune in light manufacturing and spent portions of it on the arts, which he regarded with the proprietary satisfaction of someone who has purchased a racehorse and expects to be thanked for it. He was large, red-faced, and possessed of that particular confidence that belongs to men who have never been seriously contradicted in a room they are paying for. He knew nothing about music that I could detect. He knew a great deal about being important in a place where people needed his money. He came down the left aisle during the interval, glass in hand, talking too loudly to a pair of judges who were listening with the careful expressions of people who require a man's goodwill. He paused at the foot of the stage. Daniel was there, moving the bench forward by perhaps a centimeter for the next competitor, measuring the distance with his eye, his hands resting on the bench's edge. Sir Edmund looked at Daniel. Then he looked at the assembled parents and judges and hangers-on in the front rows, the look of a man testing an audience. Well, he said loudly enough to carry, since our tuner's man is so thoroughly acquainted with the instrument. He gestured at Daniel with his glass, a loose, proprietary wave. Perhaps he'd like to fill the interval for us. Something simple. A little waltz for the ladies, perhaps. There was laughter. Not unkind, exactly. The amiable laughter of people who are not the subject of the joke. Several parents looked up from their phones. A judge smiled without looking up from his notes. Daniel straightened. He looked at Sir Edmund with an expression I could not read. Not wounded, not flustered. Still, the kind of stillness that has been arrived at rather than merely inhabited. If you'd like, he said. The laughter shifted slightly. It had expected a refusal, or a reddening, or a murmured no thank you. It did not know what to do with a yes. Sir Edmund spread his free hand expansively. By all means. Something short and simple. We're not asking for list. More laughter. Daniel looked at the piano for a moment. Then he pulled the bench back out to where he had it, sat down, and settled his hands in his lap. The murmuring in the hall hadn't stopped yet. Parents were still conferring. A child near the back was asking her mother a question in a stage whisper. The judge's table was still rustling papers. And then Daniel placed his hands on the keys. He did not play immediately. He sat with his hands resting very gently on the keyboard, not pressing, not performing the act of playing, just resting, for perhaps 3 seconds. In that time, without my being able to explain why, the murmur in the hall dropped by half. Then he played the first chord of Schubert's Piano Sonata in A major, a single chord, low, soft, rolling from the bass up through the middle register, with a weight that seemed to come not from the keys, but from somewhere inside the instrument itself. Not loud, not showy, the kind of sound that makes the air in a room change quality, the way the air changes before rain. The hall went quiet. He moved into the second movement, the andantino. And from the first phrase I understood that whatever I had been expecting, this was not it. Not a waltz, not something short and simple. The Schubert second movement is one of the most desolate things in the piano repertoire, a long, slow, heartbroken melody in F-sharp minor that circles back on itself like a grief that cannot find its conclusion. It asks nothing of the audience except that they sit still and listen, and it does not ask politely. Daniel played it without any apparent effort at all. That was the first thing I noticed, and it undid me. Not the playing itself, but the quality of ease that surrounded it, the sense of a man who had arrived somewhere he knew very well. His posture was not the careful posture of competition. It was simply how he sat. His face was turned slightly down, genuinely elsewhere, inside the music. The melody began quietly and stayed quiet for a long time. Schubert does not hurry in this movement. He lets the right hand sing one long line while the left keeps a rocking, cradling accompaniment, and then he takes that line somewhere darker than you were prepared for, and then darker still, and by the time the movement reaches its central storm, a passage of sudden, dense, almost violent chords that erupts from the quiet with no warning and then subsides again. You understand that the quietness was never peace. It was restraint. It was a man holding something very carefully so it would not break. 3 rows to my left, one of the senior judges, silver-haired, formidable in her assessments, had put down her pen. I became aware slowly that I was not breathing correctly. The storm in the middle of the movement came and went. The melody returned, more subdued, folding back into itself. Daniel's right hand found the line with the certainty of someone following a path they have walked in darkness, and the hall held it with him. I will not pretend I understood everything I was hearing. I am not a musician. I can follow a melody and recognize craft, and I know when a young competitor has truly understood their piece. But I have sat in this hall for 11 years, and I can tell you that what Daniel Marsh did with that piano was not in the same category as any of it. Not better technique or more preparation, something else entirely. The difference between someone reciting a prayer they have memorized and someone for whom the prayer is a genuine and private act. It made everything that had preceded it feel slightly literary. He played for perhaps 12 minutes. I lost track. The movement ended the way it began, quietly, the final bars slowing and softening until the last chord hung in the air for a long moment and then was gone. The hall was silent. Not the polished, held-breath silence of a competition-audience waiting for a cue to applaud. Something denser, the silence of people who have not decided yet what they are going to do, because what they have just heard has not yet finished landing. I have encountered that silence perhaps 4 times in my life. Twice in concert halls, once in a church, and now here in an interval, on a Saturday afternoon, with programs still in people's laps and half-drunk cups of tea growing cold at the back. The senior judge to my left was pressing her fingers to her mouth. 2 rows ahead of me, one of the fathers, a man I recognized vaguely, an engineer of some kind, not given to displays of emotion, had his eyes closed and was very still. I looked at Sir Edmund Voss. He was standing where he had been when he made his suggestion, glass still in his hand. The expansiveness had gone out of him entirely. He was simply watching Daniel with the expression of a man who has said something he cannot unsay and is only now beginning to understand its dimensions. Not humiliated, more fundamental than that. A man who had been shown something about the world that revised his understanding of it. The applause, when it came, began at the back of the hall. Single pairs of hands, uncertain, and then more of them, and then suddenly all of it at once. Everyone on their feet, not the polite applause of an interval act. The real thing, the kind that doesn't know when to stop. Daniel sat for a moment longer with his hands in his lap. Then he stood, smoothed the front of his work coat, that brown canvas coat with the two patch pockets, tucked the bench back under the keyboard with the same careful inch-measuring attention he always used, and walked back to his corner of the stage. He did not bow. He did not look at Sir Edmund. He picked up his polishing cloth from the console table and stood with folded in his hands, waiting for the hall to settle. I asked the hall manager about him afterwards, while Clara was retrieving her music from the green room. His name was Daniel Marsh, she told me. He had worked at the hall for 9 years. Before that, he had been a concert pianist of some seriousness. Not famous, not a household name, but working and respected, playing engagements in Germany and the Low Countries, and occasionally London. Then his wife had become ill when their daughter was 3, and he had stopped touring. She had died 4 years later. He had taken the job at Alderton Hall because the hours suited a man raising a child alone, and because he wanted, she supposed, to stay near a piano. He had never played in the hall until that afternoon. I thanked her and went to find Clara. She asked me, on the drive home, why I was so quiet. I told her I was thinking about something I had heard. She asked what. I said, a man playing Schubert for a wife who was no longer there to hear it, or perhaps for a daughter who was. I was not entirely sure. The music had not explained itself, and I had not needed it to. Clara was quiet for a while. Then she said she wished she had heard it. I told her she would have chances, that if she kept at the piano with the seriousness she'd been giving it, she would hear things like that again. Not often, but again. That was what the work was for. Not the competitions, not the scores, for the chance, every now and then, to be in a room when something like that happened. She nodded. The way children nod when they are absorbing something they will not fully understand. For another 20 years. I have been back to the Alderton competition twice since that afternoon. Daniel is still there, in his brown canvas coat, moving the bench and polishing the lid and testing the hinges. He does not play between rounds. I do not think he will again, but I watch him, now, in a way I did not before. The care he brings to the instrument, the long strokes of the cloth, the 4 minutes on a hinge, strikes me differently than it did. It seems to me now less like the habit of a conscientious employee and more like private devotion, the way a man might tend a garden he planted with someone else, quietly, without needing anyone to notice. I think about Sir Edmund's face, and I think about the senior judge pressing her fingers to her mouth, and I think about the silence that lasted longer than it was supposed to. I have attended many concerts in my life. I have heard brilliant pianists in better halls than Alderton, before audiences more qualified than a room of competition parents. I do not say that what I heard that Saturday was the finest playing I have ever encountered, because I am not equipped to judge such things. I say only this. It was the most necessary music I have ever been in the presence of, the kind that doesn't ask permission, and doesn't seek approval, and carries no concern for the opinion of the room, the kind that knows what it is. That, I have come to understand, is the rarest thing of all.